Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, pronouns he, him, and I run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Victoria Lee's newest book, A Lesson in Vengeance, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until, after over 94 years, the Strand is a sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass-Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers and the time of authors like Victoria and Casey, we wouldn't be here today, and we are truly appreciative of all of you. So tonight we are thrilled to have with us Victoria Lee for the launch of A Lesson in Vengeance. Victoria Lee grew up in Durham, North Carolina, where she spent her childhood writing ghost stories and fantasizing about attending boarding school. She has a PhD in psychology, which she uses to overanalyze fictional characters and also herself. Lee is the author of A Lesson in Vengeance, as well as The Fever King and its sequel, The Electric Heir. She lives in New York City with her partner, cat, and malevolent dog. Joining Victoria in conversation tonight is Casey McQuiston. Casey McQuiston is the New York Times bestselling author of Red, White, and Royal Blue, as well as a pie enthusiast. She writes books about smart people with bad manners falling in love. Born and raised in southern Louisiana, she now lives in New York City with her poodle mix and personal assistant, Pepper. And so, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Victoria and Casey to the stage.
Hi. Oh. Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, Sabir. That was amazing. Hi.
Hey, I saw you nearly an hour ago. How are you?
Yeah, for those of you watching home, we literally just had Po' Boys together, like literally an hour ago to like celebrate the pub day. But yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm hanging in there. I feel like it's finally sinking in that the book's actually out.
Oh my God, I love your setup, the candle, the mood, the stacks, the trans flag. It's all coming together.
Well, I mean, I just moved in like a week and a half ago. So this is actually my dryer. It's not been put away. So I just put the like flag over it and like some books. And I'm like,
it looks like you meant for it to be that way. So you're doing great.
Very intentional.
Well, first of all, congratulations. Look at how beautiful she is. Look at this. Like, I mean, she is luxurious to touch as well. So all of you guys who ordered are in for a treat, because I love when a cover feels this luxurious in the hands.
It feels like velvet almost.
I know, which feels, appropriate for the vibe.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump in with some questions because I know that we have a lot of ground to cover. But before I jump in, I just want to do a quick pronoun check. So pronoun check.
Okay. I am Victoria. I use they, she, and he pronouns. Any of them are fine, but they, them gives me gender euphoria.
And I'm Casey, and same goes for me. Actually, any pronouns are fine. I also enjoy they, them. So, or she, her, or, just keep it fresh, switch it up. So, Victoria, how does it feel to finally have this book out in the world? Because I remember you pitching this to me 2 years ago now, I think. And it has been a long time coming. How does it feel?
It feels very strange. So, you know this, I don't know about people in the audience, but like my first two books weren't really in bookstores. And so this is the first book that I've published that like I can actually go into Barnes & Noble or go into like an indie bookstore, like the Strand, for example, and see it on the shelves. So I've spent all day just like going around and walking into random bookstores and like seeing if they have my book, and if they do, signing it. And so I don't know, this is one of those moments where like it kind of hits you like, wait, I'm an author. Wait, are you serious? I'm an author?
That's awesome. I mean, it looks amazing on the shelves. I went and saw it in a Barnes & Noble today, and it looks great. So congratulations.
Which one did you go to?
I went to Union Square. I'm a sucker for Union Square.
I signed all the stock at Union Square now. I don't know if I was there before or after you, but they're signed now.
Oh, I have a signed copy. Don't worry. I've almost felt bad getting a signed copy because I was like, I could just have Victoria sign one. Anyway, okay, so let's start at the beginning. This is the question that everybody has to ask in a launch event, which is, where did the idea for this story begin, and what was the first piece that kind of came into place in this?
So this feels like a confession in that I will actually never write this into an interview where it's written down and somebody can screenshot it and then like show it later on. But I will tell all of you guys the truth, which is that me and my friend Tess were talking on the phone, and we were like talking our mutual love for The Secret History and how we wish it were gay, right? Mm-hmm. But specifically, we were talking about Donna Tartt because we had read these interviews about what Donna Tartt was actually like when she was in high school and in college. Mm-hmm. And she was this person who was like always like, one of these people were saying how like they would walk into her dorm room at 4 a.m. and she would be in there like in a full pantsuit with collar studs typing on her typewriter. And we were just like, it'd be amazing to have a story about Donna Tartt like this. But like, honestly, if you were really writing like a fictionalized story about Donna Tartt, she would have to be a lesbian and she would have to be a murderer. So again, like, can never say this like in writing because then it's like, oh, but these characters are all inspired by like completely fictional things, right? But, no, I definitely, me and my friend used to call this the murderous lesbian Donna Tartt book. And
what a vibe. What a vibe. I mean, I feel like I totally see that and I get it. And I mean, main character energy, really, to be in your room with your collar pins on.
I know. Like, what are you doing? When do you sleep? Does she sleep? No one knows. Maybe she doesn't need to.
She sleeps upright in a coffin. That's what happened.
Yeah, upright in a coffin with collar studs.
Yes. So the Dalloway School really feels like its own character in this book. And I really love how much the sense of place is such a big part of like establishing what this book is. So how much research did you do into boarding schools like this? How did you nail that sense of setting? What were like sort of the keys to really transporting you into this place?
So when I was growing up, kind of like my bio said, I always really wanted to go to boarding school. There was a boarding school in my town that I really wanted to go to, North Carolina School of Science and Math. I was not allowed to go to it because my parents quite correctly thought that I was too mentally ill to be allowed to like walk their supervision. So, but I still really wanted to go, and I had a lot of friends who went there and a lot of friends who went to other boarding schools in North Carolina. And so I was very familiar with like the culture of it. And like when I went to college, I had another friend who had gone to like the Mediera school, and I heard a lot of stories from her about that. But Dalloway is like, it's not meant to be entirely realistic, right? Like there's a large element of Dalloway that's just like vibes. Yeah. And that's intentional, right? Like it's supposed to be like almost a character in itself, where it's a setting that gives the characters like the certain pressures or like conflicts that they need in order to like have their own flaws challenged or their own flaws like brought to the fore. So it's kind of a combination of like things that I heard about real boarding schools from my friends, but also like fake boarding school vibes of like what our conceptualization of a prestigious prep boarding school would be like, and like how that could really mess with somebody like Felicity.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something like so inherently sinister about the way that you set up. I mean, like from like literally page 1, I'm like, ooh, I don't trust this setting at all, which I love because like that's kind of how, like that's kind of just the moods. Like I'm kind of suspicious of everyone the minute I get into that book. I'm like, oh, vibes are off, But I mean, like I think you did such a good job, like just building that out.
I'm glad to hear that Dalloway did not pass the vibe check because
super did not, but like not in a bad way, just in like, it is very, I love that you used a Hill House quote at the beginning because it is very like opening pan over Hill House. Something bad is gonna happen.
Yes.
How did you go about like choosing the, why am I blanking on, is it, what are the quotes? What's the name for quotes in the beginning of the book? Is it epigraph?
Oh God, I don't know.
I think it's epigraph. Oh my God, we are authors. We need to get together. I am pretty sure it's an epigraph. Anyway, how did you go about choosing the quotes that you kind of front loaded the book with?
Honestly, most of them were quotes that I was already familiar with. They are kind of like the quote equivalent of brainworms that had gotten stuck in my head because they were so creepy or like unsettling or something very real about them. And they were kind of interspersed with fake quotes. Like there are quotes from like a fake journal of cultural history about like the history of Dalloway and witchcraft, but also like quotes from Ellis's fake novel that doesn't actually exist. And so I kind of wanted to like intertwine real quotes and fake quotes to give like a kind of sense of realism, I guess, to the world and to like the characters, but also just because I think that the fake quote or the real quotes themselves were creepy, but also like it was nice to gesture toward a lot of female horror authors because like so much of the book is like focused on women and focused on like witchcraft as like the pathologization of femininity. And like throughout the book there's no men, there's no like he him pronouns used, like every character and every reference is female or non-binary. And so to like be able to gesture towards these female authors of horror and be like, okay, we're always talking about like Stephen King, we're always talking about like these male horror greats, but there's an entire canon of female and non-binary horror writers who are incredible and who have really shaped the genre more than the men in a lot of ways. So
yeah. So we've kind of talked about the origin story of Ellis, but I love asking authors about their like POV characters, their protagonists. Like I love hearing how people develop those. So can you just tell us a bit about Felicity and how you kind of formed her? Because she's such like a complex character who has a lot going on. So tell us a bit about, without spoilers, I'm trying to keep it very spoiler free. Just tell us a bit about Felicity.
So I feel like there's like kind of two directions with which I approach Felicity. So one is kind of like, I found that I do this because I did this with my debut, The Fever King 2, where I kind of came up with the villain first. Then I was like, who would be most threatened by this person? And then created that person, right? But just partly that, partly thinking about like who would be like the best foil for Ellis. But then I also like thinking about like the canon of dark academia novels, like The Secret History, for example, but also, you know, If We Were Villains and several others, they often choose like a character who is coming from like some kind of background where they're like a fish out of water in this environment. So like they usually have like some degree of privilege, but also like they don't in other ways. Like there's a way in which they are like less privileged than the people at the institution. And like that's part of how like dark academia tries to interrogate like the institution of privilege. And so like with her, I wanted to bring in like mental illness. And, you know, for me, it was like a very personal choice to use psychotic depression because that's something that I've struggled with in the past myself. And because that's something that can make you question your own reality so much. And so for her, like coming from this privileged background, but also being lesbian and being a woman and being a mentally ill lesbian woman, like all kind of created this position for her, like within the world of being empowered within like the institutions that she was part of, but also in a lot of other ways kind of being excluded from them. And like, how was she balancing that? Like, it used to be that she had all the power. She was white and rich and like old money, and she was coming to this school and like everyone loved her. She was popular, and now she's lost so much of that. But she still has to come back, and she has to now reckon with like that gap between like the power that she used to have and the power that she still has, but also the parts of that she's lost.
Yeah. Well, it kind of leads like straight into the next thing I wanted to ask you, which is like the heart of the story is, you know, sapphic attraction, sapphic interiority, sapphic people. And I just wanted to ask you, like, what do you think is like when you're writing, you know, sapphic characters, what is like singular or specific about writing, you know, a sapphic romance or sapphic attraction? Like, how do you make that feel specific to what it is?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a hard question because, you know, my debut was Achillean, right? It was a man and a man. And so, you know, it was a very different approach. And it's hard to like distill down what the difference is, because I don't want to say it's like that the sapphic characters are more emotionally invested, because that's definitely not true. Like the characters in my original book were extremely emotionally
right.
in their dynamic. I don't know. I think it's more like a sense of position in the world, like a sense of like one's own femaleness or one's own like afabness. And that does give you like a different perspective on relationships, but also on like it's like how you move through the world in general. And of course this is set at a girls' school, so like they're surrounded by women. They're not going out there and encountering men or encountering the male gaze. But I do think that like the legacy of men and of the male gaze is still very present in the book, despite its like intentional absence.
Yeah.
And so like I think that like at least for Felicity, like she's constantly evaluating her own lesbianism and trying to decide like how out she wants to be. And I think that the experience of that is unique for like MLM people and WLW people, and like they both have their own unique challenges. And I think for women, one of those challenges is like the omnipresence of the male gaze and of like the male gaze on lesbianism as being like erotic, right? Like at one point she's talking to Ellis about how, you know, oh, I didn't want to come out as lesbian because lesbians at a girls' school, that's so cliche. That's like, that's the male gaze, right? Like there's nothing weird about being lesbian at a girls' school. Lesbians are everywhere.
Right.
Like for Felicity, the first thing she thinks about is lesbians at a girls' school. I can't say that I'm that. And so I do think that there is like this kind of awareness of the perception of like being sapphic or of being lesbian throughout the book and like what that means in a way that there wasn't as much in The Fever King, which was Akalayan. Like they faced their own issues, like thinking about the role of like alcohol, for example, in their relationship. But with Felicity and Ellis, it was very much like thinking about like the way that they presented their gender. Like Ellis has a very kind of masculine presentation and Felicity has a very femme presentation. I think that that kind of thing like has different implications between two women or two AFAB people than it does between two men.
Yeah. I feel like I almost felt bad asking that question because I do think that like it's such a hard question to answer because there's this part that's beyond words. It's like the ineffable, this feeling of being attracted to women in a gay way. And it's like, how do you describe what it takes to write that other than just writing it?
I mean, I feel like I've heard people say, like, do I want to be them or do I want to have sex with them before? I feel like that was, like, very much Felicity's vibe toward Ellis for, like, at least 3/4 of the book. It's like, do I want to be her or do I want to be with her? I don't know, both.
So what a mood. What a mood. And I also feel like you keep, like, anticipating my next questions because we're vibing. Because my next thing I wanted to ask, and because I know one of the reasons you wanted me to do this conversation with you was specifically to talk about gender. And you mentioned before something that I think is really striking about this book, which is that every character is women except for like one character who's not binary. And all of the works that are referred to are works by women, and there's no he, him pronouns in the entire book, which I think is like such like a deliberate choice and such like a intentional choice. And I would love to hear you talk more about what you made, like why you made that choice.
So I think one thing that really stuck with me, and I'm sure that my agents have no idea they had this large of an effect on me, was once upon a time I was like playing around with a new book idea, and I was going to have a male protagonist and a bi-gender love interest. And my agents were just like, we love this, like the book is great, but like, aren't you just a little sick of men? Like, do we need more men? And I sit there and I was like, actually, not only do we not need more men, but my original 2 books were just so male oriented. Like most of the main characters were men. They were like there was really only like one major female character.
Shout out to Ames.
Who's the best. I was just like, okay, but like what does that say about like me? And although I'm bi-gender, like my attitude towards the gender that I was assigned at birth and like my attitude towards femininity, and like although I wrote that when I was identifying as like fairly masc, like what does it mean that it was so easy for me to reject this entire side of myself? And so I kind of challenged myself mentally. I was like, okay, well this time, the next book you write, there can't be men. Like last time you basically wrote a book with no women, so now you have to write a book with no men. And it started off as just this kind of like cheeky challenge to myself, but it ended up feeling like it was an extremely important thing for me to do, to kind of start to respect my own feminine side again, and like start to challenge my own internalized misogyny and internalized, like, I don't know, like just sexism in general and transphobia, and like center women and center their experiences, because I think it's so easy to center male experiences, or at least to like hold female experiences up in comparison to a default of male. And in a book where there are no men, and there are no he him pronouns, and there are no male designers or artists or composers referenced, there's no male like standard of comparison that you can compare the women to. They have to stand on their own, and they have to only be compared to each other. So I don't know, like I said, it started out being this weird challenge to myself about like, why don't you try writing a non-sexist book, and ended up like teaching me a lot, I guess, about like my like feminine side of my gender, and about the way that we judge women, and like whether or not we judge them on their own merits.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's such a testament to writing as a way of working through your own stuff through fiction, you know, because like for me, I kind of felt similarly that like it was easier for me to write from like the POV of a cis woman after I had written from like a more male POV, because I felt like it was like the more I like figured my own stuff out, the easier it was for me to like connect with that like girl POV without being like, you know. And I think it's like it's all like part of the journey. And I think like that's, you know, the cool thing about queer lit is you have this kind of like big amorphous ball of queerness and gender that you get to kind of swim around in.
I feel like that's the most envy vibe ever, though. Envy vibe ever, where it's like, okay, before I can write about like the gender that I was assigned at birth, I have to like claim this space of this gender that I wasn't assigned in order to like validate myself as being part of that gender. And like until you do that, you can't like look too closely at the other gender options, because like it feels invalidating. I don't know if that was your experience, but I think it was for me, where it was like I can't like think too much about like writing a woman character, because that would mean inhabiting a female mind and a female body in the process of writing. And at the time, you know, one, I felt very masked, but also I hadn't fully accepted my transness, and so that was very difficult and dysphoric for me until I had gotten it kind of out of my system.
Yeah. I mean, do you want to talk some more about what it is like to write like lesbian and sapphic attractions specifically from a trans POV?
Yeah, sure. So I do think that like it's different because, you know, both of the characters in this book are cis women, right? So they're like, when I'm writing Felicity, I'm not writing from the perspective of a genderqueer or gender fluid or trans person experiencing sapphic emotions. I'm writing from the perspective of a cis person who's very secure in her own femininity. She's very comfortable with it. And so I think it simultaneously felt like writing outside my lane almost a little bit, because like can't relate, but also like what's the word I'm looking for? I guess exploratory maybe, or like
exculpatory almost.
Right. Like finding space like while writing this for yourself and being like, I'm writing from this cis woman's mind, and that's not what I identify as, but like we do share these same like sapphic feelings, and like I can relate to the way that she feels about Ellis, even though she's feeling that as a cis person, because there's something like universal about sapphicness that transcends those boundaries of like transness and cisness. You know, not completely, like obviously there are major differences in the way that like cis and trans people experience attraction, but I think that it did allow me to feel kind of like a degree of ownership over femininity again, over like the experience of wanting a woman from a femme perspective.
Yeah. No, I that's so cool. That's exactly why I wanted to ask you that question. So you kind of touched on this earlier too, but Ellis in particular, I think like she has this sort of like mask-ish, like more androgynous aesthetic and vibe. And you know, I guess now I know why you made that choice for her. But do you want to talk a bit more about like, you know, how she interacts and engages with her presentation and what it means to her?
Yeah. So, for one, like I kind of mentioned earlier, like how there's no men in the story, right? So there's no like male standard for the women to compare themselves to. But that's part of why I think like, you know, if there had been men in the story, Ellis's androgyny would have been seen as like approaching masculinity, right? It couldn't have been like on this spectrum of like pure femininity or like femininity to like androgyny. Like it would have had to have been in comparison to maleness. And in the absence of men, instead it becomes about like her gender and her gender experience as a cis woman and the way that that can encapsulate more like masculine vibes or like masculine presentations while still being inherently feminine. But I also think that like, you know, her sibling Quinn, who's non-binary, like there's a whole scene with the two of them or them and like Felicity. And like Quinn points out how Ellis almost seems to like be trying to be more like them. And I liked the idea of like the person that a character looks up to not being a man and even not being a woman, but being like a non-binary person and having that be like aspirational for the character and having that be something that they like wanted to be more like or that they romanticized in their own mind. And so for Ellis, like being a cis woman and being, you know, secure in her cisness, but still like seeing her trans sibling and being like, that's what's cool.
Yeah.
That's what's cool. Not men, that non-binary person is cool.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So kind of to switch gears completely out of the gender space and into the genre space, which is not a pun, but those two words are very close together. So this book has like such, I mean, obviously like heavy dark academia tones. Like the voice, even just like the word choice. Like, I mean, I definitely had to look up some words while I was reading. Full disclosure. So, you know, how do you take dark academia past like this sort of aesthetic level? And what do you want to challenge about the genre? Because I know that you're somebody who likes to like subvert and explore things when you're writing.
Yeah. So one, I'm sorry about the words.
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, I did feel a little stupid, but you know, I learned something.
Well, it was somewhat on purpose because I feel like, you know, like I'm in academia and I feel like there's some unique experience about like reading an article or reading a book and be like, I have no idea what this person is saying. Sitting there with like a dictionary in your other hand and like, you know, since it is like dark academia, like the characters are enmeshed in that and like probably also sitting there in the library with a dictionary in hand doing that. But yeah, so dark academia as a genre has been like historically, canonically super cis, straight, and white, and wealthy, and a lot of those things are still true in Lesson Inventions. Like the main characters are cis and wealthy, and but part of what I wanted to do was like show how there is inequality and oppression baked into the institution of academia, and how that does disproportionately affect marginalized people. Like one of the characters named Leonie is Black, and you know, Felicity at the start of the book has no awareness of the fact that like academia affects her any differently than it affects Felicity and other white girls. But over the course of the book, she starts to learn that like Leonie faces challenges within academia that Felicity will never face. But she also, like as a disabled woman, starts to encounter these same challenges. So for me, I just recently in December got my PhD, and you know, I've said before, I'm a mentally ill person and also a disabled person with chronic illness. And I encountered so many issues like through the course of my graduate education where like I would be like just brutally suicidal. Like I remember at one point, like I had like a specific plan for suicide, like a date, and like I had a method, like I planned it all out. And like my last little cry for help was going to be that I was going to tell somebody that I was working with that I was really depressed and that I think that I needed help because I was kind of just like on the edge. And I told this person and confessed that I was suicidal. And she goes, yeah, so's everyone. That was it, right?
Yikes.
Like, you know, I told my advisor at one point that like I was really struggling with depression, and instead of like getting referred to, you know, counseling on campus or being asked like, is this a hostile work environment? Yes, it was. Or like, is there like anything, are you being bullied by people in the program? Yes, I was. Like, instead it was just, do you need to go on medical leave? Which
is not an answer to your problems.
Right. It's not the answer to your problems, but also like we had already had people in our program go on medical leave for mental illness and they never came back.
Mhm.
Like this wasn't like something where it's like go on medical leave and then come back when you feel better and we'll support you. It's go on medical leave, we'll never see you again. You're too weak for the program.
Mhm.
And like, so I wanted to really talk about how academia creates this environment where you're supposed to be obsessed with a topic. And for Felicity, she's supposed to be obsessed with this topic about the history of these witches who allegedly attended Dalloway 200 years ago.
Mhm.
And you're supposed to single-mindedly focus on that and research it down to the bone, write a thesis on it, but not too much. Don't go too
Mhm.
far. Don't get obsessed with it. Like obsessed, but not too much. And so when Felicity kind of goes overboard and she gets very hyperfixated on it and it becomes part of like her active psychoses, she gets punished for it, but she doesn't like receive the support she needs to actually process that experience or like process the pressures of academia. She's just kind of like, okay, bye, like go to your like little residential treatment program and then like come back when you're ready to come back. Like, but the environment doesn't change like while she's gone. Like there aren't any steps taken at the school to make it easier for her to reintegrate. And so I wanted to talk about, I guess, the way that academia creates these pressures, but then doesn't also create the safety nets for the people that then crack under those pressures that it seems so inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really long-winded way of talking about disability in academia. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, that's exactly, you know, I think that like it is such a cool like aesthetic, but there's so many more things you can do to like kind of explore and subvert the genre. And I love seeing people do that. So it's great to hear you talk about it.
Yeah, it's I'm a little bit worried. I'm like, I hope that like no one that I was in grad school with is watching this. I'm sure they are. If you are, I'm not talking about you.
You're okay. You came to the event and you ordered a book, so you're probably fine.
Like odds are we're good.
Yeah. I have like one more like kind of serious question, and then I have some fun questions. So just one more thematic question, I promise. But I'm having fun. The topics are heavy, but I love listening to your thoughts on them. So another big theme that I took away from this book is just like darkness, and darkness as like, you know, whether you should turn away from it or embrace it, like how it can change you, how it's scary, but like alluring at the same time. Do you just want to talk a little bit about like how you explored that theme, specifically like how it relates to trauma and recovering from trauma and what Felicity is going through in the book?
Yeah, actually, I love the way that you phrase this about like the way that it relates to trauma, especially because I think that like if you are coming from experience of trauma or an experience of grief or something, there's like a kind of way that people pathologize that experience, like essentially pathologize it such that like its essence is now pathology as opposed to like it being a neutral experience that a lot of people have that can affect your life in a lot of different ways. So thinking about like books that touch on, for example, like sexual abuse, right? They're so often like filed into like, oh, this is like dark fiction, or this is like super mature YA, or like mature middle grade, or whatever it is. Even though like the experience of that is so common and it's something that like can be handled in a lot of different ways, it feels like it kind of gets all of these like disclaimers appended to it about like how like the content could be like threatening or just dark or overwhelming, which is fair in a lot of ways because like trigger warnings are super important, for example, but it can also be kind of stigmatizing for the victim survivor in the case of trauma, or for the person doing the grieving in the case of grief, of feeling like these experiences that I'm having are niche experiences, or they're experiences that shouldn't be talked about among the general population. They should be reserved for people who get together. And it's like, we are all here to talk about abuse. Like, and that can feel extremely alienating. And so I think that, like, in the context of lesson inventions and like the themes of darkness through the work and the themes of like Felicity starting to recognize like the darkness within herself and embrace it as opposed to reject it and fear it, I think for me a lot of that came from this and from trauma, and from, instead of like thinking about my trauma or like my experiences as being like dark or threatening or dangerous, as being like part of me, and they can be what I make them, and I don't have to be afraid of them or ashamed of them, and instead they can be not neutral, but they can just be integrated with my life, I guess. They don't have to be something that like I can only think of on Sundays at 3 p.m. with like the lights on and like a scented candle burning, right? Like, and I think that that can be empowering in a way of like taking the things that scare you or the things that traumatize you and the things that broke you, and instead making them something that makes you stronger. And that's not always possible. At least for me, it's something that I do try to do, because I think that I've experienced too much like fear of my own trauma or fear of my own darkness. And I think that's especially leveraged against women and people who are assigned female at birth. And so to have like Felicity, like in this book and in the context of being a woman, in the context of being a book with only women, like to see this darkness within herself, and instead of being like, oh no, I'm afraid of that, we can't talk about it, we can't look directly at it, being like, okay, yeah, that's a part of me. So are all of these other good qualities. And this quality that you were saying is bad is actually neutral, and I can use it in the way that I want. I can use it as a tool, or I can use it as a weapon.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that was my last serious question, and you nailed it. I would like to kind of wrap up this portion of the evening by asking you, what is your favorite thing about this book? You know, it can be literally a word or a line or a character or a theme, anything.
Okay, hold on. See, this is a hard question. I'm always
that you wanted to be surprised.
I know. I didn't want to hear any of these questions in advance because I was worried that I would like script them too much in my head. They're all like, all right. I really like the scenes that we have with Quinn, to the point that I really fought to not have them cut from the book. My editor kind of wanted to cut that whole segment, and I was like, no, our non-binary Regent Quinn is gonna be in this book. I think that they're one of my favorite characters. So probably either that entire sequence or the bit when like Felicity is watching Ellis fence and kind of has a lesbian awakening within herself, watching Ellis like smack swords with some other girl.
You know, is it a lesbian book if there is not at least one sword?
True.
I'm just not sure. I don't know if that qualifies. So what is next for you? Can you tell us, I don't know if you can tell us anything. Can you tease anything that might be coming down the pipeline, the Victoria Lee pipeline?
So it's not announced yet, so I can't say too many details, but I do have a 2022 YA book. Assuming it doesn't get completely eviscerated in edits to the degree that the actual plot changes, it will be like a murder lesbian Umbrella Academy meets Dear Evan Hansen. Again, subject to change because I did it on May 3rd and I haven't gotten my edits back yet.
Yeah.
And I know that it was really bad, so that could be very different. And then like these aren't books that like have sold yet, but I'm just working on like a adult dark fantasy and an adult rom angst, as my agents called it.
You know that I am rooting for you to get into romance. So.
I know. I still need to send you that proposal and see what you think.
Yeah. Okay, so before we jump to Q&A, we have a few minutes, and I love to throw this at authors when I moderate events, which is like a lightning round of some kind. And so for this one, I was inspired by the fact that you are quite prolific on TikTok. And if you don't follow Victoria on TikTok, you should follow them on TikTok. So a thing that is like very common on TikTok, which I'm sure I don't tell you, is like a couple and like they're each like holding a shoe or something, and they're like being like blind, like asked, you know, which of you is most likely to do this? Which of you is most likely to do that? You know, and they have to answer. And so I was thinking it'd be fun if we did Ellis or Felicity, which of them is more likely to do these things. So I'm gonna just give you some prompts. You cannot take too much time. You just have to answer with your gut. Okay, so which of them is most likely to show up at a wedding just to object?
Ellis.
Give us more information. Why would she do this?
I mean, I feel like she would just do it for the vibes. Like, she's like a method writer, right?
Yeah, the trauma of it all.
Like, I want to write about a messy wedding in one of my books. How can I like ruin the next wedding I go to?
Okay, who is most likely to survive on a desert island?
Honestly, Felicity. I feel like Ellis is like the like more intuitive, obvious choice, but I think that Felicity ultimately, like, she has grit. Like, Ellis pretends at having grit, but does not actually possess it. Whereas I think that like Felicity is a survivor. Like, she would get through anything, and she would get through it all.
Yeah. When I feel like Felicity has like more wilderness training.
That too.
Okay, which of them is more likely to have a book talk account?
Ellis. But like, it would not be like trendy. Like, I don't think that she would do any of like the popular sounds or anything. I think it would just be like weird, like aesthetic, like vibey, like sequences of like mood music in the background, and like, here's a candle, now here's a bridge, now here's a hands on a typewriter.
I feel like I'm imagining, like, you know, those like recipe videos where it's somebody like doing like ASMR of like cooking something, and then their voiceover in like a very soothing voice is telling you like the story of the saddest thing that's ever happened to them.
Yes,
you know?
that's exactly what she would do.
I feel like that's her vibe. Yeah. Which of them is more likely to read the Feverwake series?
Ellis. I don't know that she would like it, but it's definitely not Felicity's bag. And I think that Ellis would probably read it because it would be pitched to her as gay, and she would read anything that's pitched to her as gay.
Okay, good answer. Which is more likely to get way too into a niche hobby like knitting or model trains or something along those lines?
And Ellis. But I think it's like the method writer thing. Like, she has like, she got super into like whiskey because she needed to write a character who knew about whiskey, and she's like this like 17-year-old girl who's like, I'm gonna like learn all about the tasting notes of this bourbon. Like a complete asshole. So I think that she would definitely like want to write about a character who, I don't know, like builds like, do you ever go on like the like things for ants subreddit, like the tiny little like, here's like an egg that I made in this tiny frying pan. Like, she would be doing that.
Okay, yeah, I see it. I think I already know the answers to these two, but I have to ask anyway. Which is most likely to start a cult, and which one is most likely to join a cult?
Ellis and Felicity in that.
Yep. I mean, it's pretty much what happens.
Yeah. I mean, that's just the book.
And finally, as I know you are a Taylor Swift stan, which one of them is most likely to know the lyrics to every song on Folklore?
Felicity.
Yeah. She's a sad girl.
On vinyl. Like, oh yeah, she knows every lyric by heart.
Yeah. Okay, so we are at 8:45. We've got 15 minutes to go. I am going to open up some questions from audience Q&A. So let's see. Holly asks, how well do you think Felicity and Ellis would fare in the world of the Fever King, and what would their presenting powers be?
I think they would actually both fare really well, because I think they both have a kind of Machiavellianism to them that would serve them well in Lair's administration. I think that Ellis's presenting power would probably be like seeing the future or something like that. And Felicity's presenting power would be, I don't know, like maybe intuition or empathy or something, like something psionic.
I'm so sorry that my first thought was Esme from Twilight.
No! Not
but that was her power, was empathy.
I was not even like in that ballpark.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm gonna try and get to as many of these questions as I can. I'm just gonna choose randomly. So I hope I get to yours. Which was okay? So Lucrezia asks, what was the most difficult character to write and why?
I think Felicity was the most difficult because Ellis was like, I don't know, she had like a really strong personality, or like I guess not a strong personality so much as like the boundaries of her personality were really clearly defined. Like there were obvious things that she would and wouldn't do, or wouldn't think, or wouldn't say. But Felicity wasn't really that way. Felicity was very malleable. Like she had like her core personality, but it was so subject as well to like how she felt about herself at the moment, or how she thought other people felt about her at the moment. And so I think that it was much more difficult to think about like if one of these questions were to be, what would Felicity do if XYZ happened? I'd probably be like, well, I don't know. Like, what happened the previous day? What did she eat for lunch?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, what is the more? She was a lot harder to write.
Right. Okay, so let's see. Ryan, who I believe we both know, asked, what scared you the most about writing this book?
So when I first started writing it, I remember thinking multiple times the book was too challenging for my skill level. Because as you pointed out before, like it has a lot of big words. It's very like pretentious. It's very like high literary.
It's literary.
Like, write those. And I was very worried, like both that like stylistically, like with the kind of like more literary flair to it, but also just with like Felicity in particular, like her character trajectory and all of the like developments she makes across the course of the book, that I wouldn't be able to do it persuasively or well. And you know, I think jury's still out on whether either of those things are true, but I definitely found subjectively that while I was writing it, I felt like it got easier, and like I felt like I started to develop the skills that I needed, and like kind of sank into like the voice and sank into the vibes, and like started to get a clearer idea in my head of like the structure of the character arcs. And so although originally I thought multiple times I'm gonna have to stop writing this book because it's too hard for me, I have to come back to it when I'm a better writer, like ultimately I think that challenging myself with it helped me develop the skills to finish it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, sorry, okay, there it is. I just scrolled away from the one I was about to ask. So Natalie asked, if your book were to get an adaptation, would you want it to be a TV show or a film? What would be the most important thing for you to keep consistent with the source material, and what do you think would be interesting to explore differently in an adaptation? And this is from an aspiring TV writer. Haha. They said haha, not me.
I think it would be good as TV. Mostly because I would want to like include other plot lines that didn't get fleshed out in the actual book. I think that worked really well on TV. I think the most important thing to keep would be like the absence of men, so that like all of the women can still like stand on their own and have like their own like arcs and paths that are independent of like the male gaze and the male standard. But I would really love like to see more of Leonie. Like if this were a TV show, I would want like Leonie's experience at Dalloway to be like really fleshed out, and that was something that like felt very much outside of my lane while I was writing it. But like with a diverse writers room, like I would love to like see how Leonie's experience of all this is super different from Felicity's.
Yeah. So I let's see. Okay, Mike Lasagna asks, what did you read to help you prepare to write A Lesson in Vengeance?
So obviously I read The Secret History, but I actually didn't like finish rereading it like while I was writing the book. I'd read it a lot previously, and I tried to reread it to inspire myself to write the book, and couldn't focus on it. Not because it's like a bad book, but because I think it's really hard for me to read anything that's too similar to something that I'm writing. So I'm afraid that it will like end up unintentionally influencing the book.
Mm-hmm.
That I ended up reading like a bunch of adult thrillers and adult romance books. And this book is a little bit of a thriller, but it's definitely not a romance. And so I think that like jumping kind of outside of the genre helped me like bring a little bit more of the thriller elements into it, but also like deepen the romance and make it more textured and nuanced. So you know, kind of, I guess, paradoxically, it wasn't dark academia books that helped me the most with this book. It was books that were nothing like this book.
Okay, so what 2 book fandoms would you recommend A Lesson in Vengeance to?
Probably the Raven Boys.
See that for sure.
Yeah. And Ninth House? Is there a fandom for Ninth House?
I mean, there's a Lee Bardugo fandom. So
yeah,
I think that counts. I think that counts. Okay. So Cass asks, and I hope that you know enough about this topic to answer the question, because I don't know if I do. What Pokemon would Ellis and Felicity have as companions?
Okay. I don't know as much as I used to know, but I'm still going to do my best. So I think that Felicity would have a Bulbasaur just because, like, I don't know. I feel like she needs, like, a cute little plant to be her friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Ellis would probably have what's the one that's like it's like a snake, but it's a snake made out of rocks?
Oh my god. I don't know. All right. Wait, hang on. I can Google this really fast. Pokemon Rock Snake. Give me somebody is yelling at their screen right now.
Yes, somebody in the chat said it's on it. Oh, it's yeah, okay, it's Strand. Thank you.
Oh my god, that's so funny. Okay.
Oh, Ryan, shut up. Ryan's laughing at us.
We've shown our asses on this stream now. Okay. So what do you want? Elle asks, what do you want people to take away from reading A Lesson in Vengeance?
I guess like probably seeing people with psychotic disorders in a more nuanced light as people who can have really lush and involved interior worlds and hopes and dreams and ambitions, and not just as like caricatures, but also I would like them to think more critically about the institution of academia and also like the like just corporate institutions in general, like any institution that is inherently oppressive and ableist and makes demands upon people and then punishes them for trying to meet those demands. Yeah,
for sure. All right. We got a few more. We got 7 more minutes. Let's see how many we can get to. Somebody says, Cass says, oh, if we're talking Taylor Swift, what would Felicity's favorite song be by Taylor Swift?
Oh, gosh. Probably The Lakes.
Okay.
There's nothing to Casey because Casey doesn't like Taylor Swift.
That's not true. I really, really like Folklore.
Folklore is amazing.
Which one has Gold Rush on it?
I think it's Folklore, but I'm actually not sure because I get Folklore.
That's what I thought.
A little more confused.
I don't know, but I really like Gold Rush and Mirrorball.
That's taste. Yeah.
Yeah. They're on my playlist for my book 3. But yeah, I see The Lakes too. I see The Lakes for sure.
It's such like an angsty song, and I feel like Felicity would be into that.
I mean, it's also like kind of about nature, you know, and Felicity likes that too.
Also, the chat is saying that it's from Evermore, so I just look like
wow, we are 0 for 2. We fumbled the ball on Pokemon and Taylor Swift. All right. Okay, without being spoilery, what was your favorite scene to write in Lesson in Vengeance? And this is from Lily.
Probably the garrote scene, which I can't say any more about because it's spoilery.
Okay.
You know.
When you know, you know. When you get to it, you will know. So just take a mental note. Okay. Mal says, is asking advice for aspiring writers, especially queer, non-binary, and more marginalized writers, because I feel like there's always a barrier to break through to write the story you really want to tell, which is a great question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I do think that more of the boundaries are kind of coming down with regard to like queer and trans authors at least having like the door open to be able to try and get things published, whereas it used to be like much more difficult before like so many queer and trans authors went before us and like started like paving the way. But I do think that like it's just so important to write the book that is the story that speaks to you and is the one that like makes you feel obsessed with it and makes like you feel like this is the book that you would want to read if you were writing it. And that's the same advice that I would give to a straight person, but I think especially with a queer person, like there's the stories that are speaking to you and that are making you feel passionate are probably the same stories that'll make other queer kids feel passionate. And I feel like that like passion about queer stories is something that's so like not universal, but like just a strong through line in queer culture. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's just because I came up in fandom and like I feel like there were so many queer kids in fandom just like obsessing over like certain characters or whatever, and like headcanons about the characters and fan fiction about the characters. But like if you can kind of create something like that in your head that you feel that way about, that's queer, I think hopefully it will speak to like other queer kids who also want to feel like a connection to queerness and a connection to like other queer readers and queer creators.
For sure. Yeah. Okay, so Ash has a question and he would like to know hardest parts about being an author / things you weren't expecting when you started out.
I think the hardest part of being an author is like the more books that you kind of come out with, like getting this awareness of like what readers' reactions might be, and like thinking like with the Lesson Inventions, for example, I was like, this book is so different from my first 2 books. What if the people who like my first 2 books don't like this book? Like, what if I'm betraying them by writing a book that's nothing like my first 2 books? And like that kind of like, that can get in your head. Like I was talking with another writer recently about, and he was like, yeah, don't do anything that's going to ruin your love for writing. You know, if that means like, don't do social media or don't like read reviews or don't like, I don't know, whatever it is, like, don't let that voice get in your head that starts questioning your creative decisions on the basis of like what some hypothetical non-existent person might think or like from you. And I've been trying really hard to like keep that in mind and to like write the things that I want to write and that I feel passionately about, as opposed to thinking about like, you know, what my like probably incorrect assumption of like what people want from me is. And so I think that's the hardest part, because when you're writing, like before you become a professional writer, you're just writing like based off the things that make you feel happy and the things that make you feel passionate, and like you don't really like think about what's marketable or what your publisher wants or what readers want. You're just writing what you want. And so trying to like stay focused on that, I think, is the hardest part of being a wrter. Was there another part of the question? I feel like there was, and I forgot.
It's just like things you didn't expect, which I think kind of falls under the same umbrella. I mean, you didn't expect to be recognized on the W train today.
That did happen. I got recognized on the W train, and then somebody tweeted at me that they also recognized me yesterday when I was walking through my neighborhood, but didn't want to say anything.
You're like, famous. You've made it. Okay, last question, and then I think we have to sign off, but a good one to end on, I think. There's no name attached to this one, but the question is, who would be most likely to enter a burger grilling contest, Ellis or Felicity?
Ellis. Yeah.
I see that.
She just would.
She just wants to prove she can.
She wants to prove she can make a burger that everyone would say, this is the best burger I've ever had. Everything.
I feel like Ellis is such a perfect encapsulation of like as a teen, if I was a teen reader, I would look at her and be like, this is embodying my desire to be the best, like to be like the best and most special at everything I could ever attempt to do. Like, this is what I wish I was doing. Like, that was definitely what I wished I was as a teenager.
Yeah. Definitely. Also, that question apparently came from my partner, so I feel very
well, what a note to end on.
And sorry to interrupt. Thank you both for such a fantastic event. It was so enlightening and fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for hosting it. It was incredible.
It was a pleasure. And to our audience, if you haven't bought a copy of A Lesson in Vengeance, you can press the handy green button center screen to get a signed copy. On that note, thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank y'all. Good night.
So much.